The tension snapped as figures burst from the tree line. Survivors, ragged men who had escaped the massacre at the camp, stumbled into the clearing, rifles raised in panic. Their eyes widened at the sight before them. Marcus standing calm, Jamal tense, Ward wide-eyed, and the infected standing still as statues, their focus unwavering. "There!" one of the men shouted, raising his rifle. "He's the reason they're here. He's leading them." The clearing erupted in chaos. Gunfire cracked, the survivors screaming in fury and fear. But the infected didn't attack. They only moved when Marcus did, forming a grotesque shield in front of him, absorbing bullets with rotting flesh that refused to fall fast enough. Marcus staggered back, horrified by the sight of corpses defending him like loyal soldiers. Jamal charged forward, swinging his blade with savage precision, cutting down one of the armed survivors before he could reload. His face was twisted with rage, not at the survivors, but at the grim theater Marcus unwillingly commanded. "Call them off, Marcus. Tell them to stop. Prove to me you're still you." Ward fell to his knees in the dirt, screaming over the gunfire. "Don't you see? This is the moment. Command them. Show them you can end this war with a word." Marcus' heart pounded as bullets tore through the night and men screamed in terror. He felt the pull of the infected, their attention like a current dragging him into its depths. He could speak, perhaps, and end the firefight in a tide of carnage. Or he could resist, sever the bond, and step back into helpless humanity. Jamal locked eyes with him, his blade dripping, his voice raw. "Choose, brother. Are you man or are you monster?" The infected leaned closer, awaiting his decision. The survivors reloaded, desperate and furious. Ward begged, Jamal demanded, and the dead held their breath. Marcus raised his voice, low but firm. "No more." He stepped back, away from the corpses. His will pushed against the weight pressing on him, resisting the intoxicating bond. The infected twitched, uncertain, their stillness breaking into confused shuffling. But Ward leapt forward, shrieking, "Don't waste it. They're yours." He shoved Marcus toward them, desperate to see the experiment fulfilled. The sudden shove broke Marcus' restraint. His balance faltered, his focus cracked, and the dead surged, not toward the survivors, not toward Jamal, but toward Ward. They descended on him with silent precision, dragging him into their embrace. His screams tore through the forest as Marcus and Jamal watched, unable or unwilling to intervene. When the feeding frenzy ended, the infected turned back to Marcus, their jaws dripping, awaiting more unspoken commands. Jamal stepped between Marcus and the creatures, his machete raised. "End it, right now, before this gets bigger than both of us." Marcus met his friend's gaze, then the gaze of the corpses. The choice was his, a razor's edge between damnation and salvation. With every ounce of will, he lifted his blade, drove it into the chest of the nearest infected, and snarled through clenched teeth, "I'm not your leader." One by one, he cut them down, each swing an act of defiance against the tide threatening to claim him. Jamal joined him, and together they reduced the hushed audience of corpses into lifeless piles of rot. When the clearing was still again, Marcus dropped to his knees, chest heaving, his blade heavy with gore. Jamal stood over him, silent, his machete slick but his expression resolute. The bond was broken, the curse rejected. In the silence that followed, Marcus understood the truth. The dead could be commanded, yes. But the living would never forgive the man who chose to do it. The world didn't need a king of corpses. It needed men willing to remain men, no matter the cost. The survivors had fled into the night, terrified of what they had seen. Ward was gone, consumed by his obsession. Only Marcus and Jamal remained, brothers bound not by power, but by the choice to resist it. The forest whispered with distant groans, a reminder that the dead were never far. But Marcus felt no pull, no weight pressing against his thoughts, only silence. He looked at Jamal, who wiped his blade clean and met his gaze with weary relief. "You did the right thing, brother." Marcus nodded slowly, the decision etched into his soul. "Then let's keep walking. As men, not monsters." And together they vanished into the trees, leaving behind a clearing soaked with blood and burden, but free of the power that might have enslaved them all. The clearing was hushed except for the ragged breaths of Marcus, Jamal, and Dr. Ward. The handful of infected that had wandered and stood motionless, their clouded eyes locked on Marcus as though he were the only thing anchoring them to the earth. The silence carried an unnatural weight, as if the forest itself was waiting for his next move. Marcus felt their attention pressing against him like a tide, a pressure that was both alien and intimate, whispering to the primal corners of his mind. Jamal broke it with a low, venomous whisper. "This ain't natural. They're supposed to eat us, not wait for your permission. Tell me you don't feel it, Marcus. Tell me you're not about to start barking orders at corpses." His machete trembled in his hand, not with fear, but with the tension of a man who was seconds away from lashing out at everything he didn't understand. Dr. Ward adjusted his cracked glasses, his hands trembling. "Don't you see, Jamal? This isn't damnation, it's evolution. The virus hasn't ignored them, it's adapted them. Marcus is the key, a bridge between the living and the dead. If he can control them." "Control?" Jamal spat, his voice rising. "You think that's power? That's a curse. Today it's a few walkers standing still. Tomorrow it's a million of them tearing through every survivor camp left on the map. And guess who they'll blame when that happens? Not the virus. Him." Marcus' jaw tightened as he watched the infected sway in their silent vigil. He wanted to deny it, to shove Ward's words and Jamal's fears aside, but the truth gnawed at him. He had felt it in the camp, when the horde paused, when their hunger turned into eerie patience. They hadn't seen prey in him. They'd seen direction. The night cracked with sudden gunfire in the distance. The three men flinched, and the infected in the clearing twitched as one, snapping their heads toward the sound. They didn't move until Marcus instinctively stepped forward. Only then did they take a step with him, mimicking his pace like soldiers following their commander. Jamal cursed under his breath and backed away. "You see that? They're not ignoring you. They're bound to you, like dogs on a leash. Tell me you're not tempted, Marcus. Tell me you ain't thinking of leading them right back to Rhea's camp and finishing the job those teeth didn't." Marcus didn't answer. In his mind, images warred against each other, using this grotesque power to wipe out hostile survivors, or perhaps herding the dead away from human settlements, carving safe zones for those still clinging to life. It was intoxicating, the idea of control in a world defined by chaos. Yet behind that temptation was the echo of Rhea's last glare, filled with fear. To the living, he wasn't salvation. He was the embodiment of their nightmares. Ward's voice broke his reverie, urgent and unsteady. "You could rebuild the world with this. You could turn the tide. Every settlement would bow to you, not out of fear, but gratitude. You'd be the first man in history to hold the reins of death itself." His words were fevered, the desperation of a man who saw salvation in science regardless of its morality. Marcus turned on him sharply, eyes narrowing. "And what then, Ward? What happens when gratitude turns into resentment? When people realize the only reason they're safe is because I keep the monsters close like pets? They won't see a savior. They'll see a tyrant with an army of corpses." The infected shuffled forward, closing the gap. Jamal's knuckles whitened around the hilt of his machete. "You're right about one thing. People won't stand for it. And if they won't, I damn sure won't. If it comes down to it, Marcus, I'll cut you down myself before I watch you crown yourself king of the dead." His words weren't a threat. They were a vow, the kind only a brother in arms could deliver. Gunfire tore the night apart, each shot echoing like a desperate heartbeat. The barricade, already weakened by rust and crude repair, buckled under the relentless weight of bodies pressing against it. The horde poured inward with a roar of gnashing teeth and guttural moans, overwhelming the guards who had fought until their rifles clicked empty. Smoke from muzzle flashes burned the air, mingling with the sickly stench of rot. The camp was no longer a sanctuary. It was a trap, its walls now a cage with the dead flooding inside. Marcus and Jamal stood in the chaos, the tide splitting around them. The infected should have torn them apart, yet the creatures parted, snarling but refusing to strike. Men around them screamed as they were dragged down, yet Marcus and Jamal remained untouched, frozen in the eye of a storm that had chosen to avoid them. Captain Reyes saw it too. His rifle was steady as he fired into the horde, but his gaze flicked often toward Marcus, the calculation in his eyes hard and cold. It was no longer a question of survival. It was a question of trust, of what Marcus and Jamal were. Jamal spat into the dirt, his voice a rasp over the din. "They're walking past yous, man. Like we don't even exist." "Not the time," Marcus growled, though the truth twisted in his chest. The sight was undeniable. Their immunity wasn't just survival. It was spectacle. In the eyes of desperate men, that kind of difference was enough to damn them. The wall finally collapsed in a splintering crash, sending a wave of infected surging through the breach. Guards broke rank, some fleeing, others throwing themselves into hopeless melee. Marcus grabbed Jamal by the shoulder. "We move now. Toward the eastern exit. Stay low, stay quiet." They ran through the chaos, the camp dissolving into screams and gunfire behind them. Yet as they moved, Marcus noticed more of the infected turning toward him, not to strike but to follow, their milky eyes locked on his movements as though he were a beacon. They trailed him, silent and watchful, ignoring the living flesh all around. Dr. Ward stumbled out from a burning tent, his journal clutched tight even as flames licked the canvas behind him. His glasses were cracked, his face bloodied, but his eyes burned with desperate clarity when they found Marcus. "They follow you," he shouted over the chaos. "Not because you're prey, because you're something else. Signal. A leader." Marcus didn't have time to argue, but the words cut deep. He seized the old man's arm and dragged him toward the escape route. Jamal flanked them, his machete ready, though not a single corpse dared lunge at them. The creatures parted again, flowing around them like water around stone. Behind them Reyes roared orders. "Don't let them leave. They're the reason we're dying." His soldiers, panic-stricken and desperate, turned their rifles not on the horde but toward Marcus and Jamal. Bullets tore through the dirt at their feet, and Marcus felt the betrayal like a blade to the spine. Jamal cursed and shoved Marcus forward. "Figures. Zombies ignore us, but the living can't wait to put us down." Ward stumbled, his journal nearly falling from his grasp, but Marcus steadied him. They darted between collapsing tents, past burning barrels and shrieking survivors, each step a gamble between freedom and sudden death. The horde didn't touch them, but Reyes' men didn't care. To them Marcus and Jamal were not immune men. They were traitors who carried death in their shadows. A bullet grazed Marcus' shoulder, tearing flesh, but he didn't slow. They reached the eastern barricade, a crude wall of cars and timber. Marcus shoved Ward up first, then Jamal, before scrambling after them. On the other side, the forest loomed, dark and unwelcoming but free of the suffocating press of death. As they dropped into the undergrowth, Marcus turned back for one final look. Reyes was on the wall, his rifle leveled, his expression a storm of fury and fear. The infected swarmed beneath him, clawing at the structure, yet he didn't fire at them. He aimed at Marcus. For a moment, Marcus thought the captain would pull the trigger. But then the horde surged, dragging Reyes from his perch in a tangle of gnashing teeth. His scream was lost in the tide. Marcus didn't wait. He pushed deeper into the forest, the others at his side, until the campfires were nothing but a distant glow and the moans of the horde faded into the wind. They collapsed in a clearing, lungs burning, the silence of the woods pressing down heavy after the chaos. Ward lay on his back, clutching his journal to his chest, muttering fragments of theory between gasps for air. Jamal leaned against a tree, blade still in his hand, shaking his head in disbelief. "They were more scared of us than the zombies," Jamal said, his voice low. We weren't their salvation, we were their curse. Marcus wiped the blood from his arm, his mind turning over the night's revelations. The infected ignored them, yes. But more than that, they followed. They lingered near him, waited on his movements, responded to his presence like soldiers awaiting orders. Ward sat up suddenly, his eyes wild behind broken lenses. Don't you see? This is bigger than immunity. You're not just invisible to them. You're connected. They're drawn to you. That's why they stopped in the camp, why they hesitated when you moved. You represent something to them, something they obey. Jamal barked a bitter laugh. Obey? You think these corpses take orders now? That Marcus is some kind of zombie messiah. The words hung in the night, absurd yet chilling. Marcus didn't answer. He remembered the way the infected had paused in the chaos, their snarls dying into silence, their focus unshakable. It hadn't been random. It had been deliberate. The forest rustled, and Marcus' hand went to his blade. Figures emerged from the shadows, staggering but purposeful. A handful of infected drifted into the clearing, their pale eyes fixed not on Ward or Jamal but on him. They didn't attack. They simply stood, swaying slightly, their jaws slack as if waiting. Ward's voice trembled with awe. They're listening. The clearing fell silent save for the rasp of the dead. Jamal's grip tightened on his machete. Tell me this doesn't mean what I think it means. Marcus stared at the creatures, their stillness more terrifying than any frenzy. He felt the weight of their gaze pressing into him, not with hunger but with recognition. He didn't speak, but in his silence lay an unspoken truth. The dead didn't just ignore him. They deferred to him. And that, he realized, was a burden heavier than any he'd carried before. The gates of the outpost groaned open after a tense exchange with the guards, their rifles aimed squarely at Marcus, Jamal, and the weakened Dr. Ward. The sentries' eyes were hard, their fingers taut on the triggers, and the weight of suspicion was unmistakable. To step inside was not relief. It was submission to another set of dangers. The barricades were constructed from scavenged metal, abandoned vehicles, and concrete slabs, a crude fortress that spoke of desperation rather than confidence. Beyond the walls, campfires flickered among rows of tents and lean-tos, while armed men prowled with the restless energy of cornered wolves. Captain Reyes emerged from the command tent, a broad-shouldered man whose presence carried both authority and unease. His sharp eyes scanned the newcomers before settling on Marcus. "Soldier," he said, the word a question more than a greeting. "Formerly," Marcus answered, his voice even. "Good enough." Reyes' gaze swept to Jamal, then to the shivering scientist. "And the other two." "Survivors," Marcus said. Ward adjusted his cracked glasses and opened his mouth, but Reyes raised a hand. "Explanations can wait. You'll be searched, catalogued and placed. Nobody moves freely here without my say-so." His tone left no room for debate. Jamal smirked faintly, but there was no humor in it. "Place us where, exactly?" "Next to the folks who've been chewed on." That drew a dangerous silence. The guards shifted uneasily, and Reyes' expression tightened. Marcus shot Jamal a look sharp enough to cut steel. Words could kill here quicker than teeth. Inside, the camp was a fragile ecosystem. Men argued over rations, families huddled behind torn tarps, and the occasional gunshot rang out beyond the wall where someone tested their nerves against the undead pressing against the perimeter. The air smelled of sweat, smoke, and fear. It wasn't safety, it was a pressure cooker. Marcus and Jamal were escorted to a tent at the edge of camp. A guard, young but already hardened by too much death, barked at them to stay put until summoned. Ward was dragged elsewhere, coughing violently into his sleeve, his protests ignored. The silence that followed was heavy. Jamal leaned against the canvas wall and muttered, "Friendly bunch." "They're alive," Marcus said. "That's what matters." But his tone betrayed the doubt curling in his gut. Hours passed before Reyes returned, accompanied by 2 lieutenants and the trembling figure of Ward. The scientist looked pale, his journal clutched in his hands like a lifeline. Reyes gestured for the men to sit around a crude wooden table lit by lanterns. "You've brought me a problem," the captain began, eyes fixed on Marcus. "Dr. Ward tells me the infected don't attack you. Either of you." Jamal raised an eyebrow. "That's supposed to be bad news." "It's unnatural," Reyes snapped. "And unnatural is dangerous. People will see it as a curse, not a blessing. If word spreads, I won't be able to contain the panic." Ward adjusted his glasses, voice quivering with both fear and excitement. "It's not random. I've studied the infected long enough to know their behavior patterns. They're not ignoring these men by accident. The virus is making a choice." "Explain," Marcus said, his tone flat but edged with steel. "The strain that animates the infected, it's more than a mindless parasite. It's selective, discerning, knows what to attack, what to consume. And for reasons I don't yet understand, it does not recognize you as prey." His gaze flicked between Marcus and Jamal, almost reverent. "It's possible you represent a genetic immunity, or worse, or better, something the infection itself respects." Jamal gave a short laugh, though his eyes were dark. "So what? The zombies are racist now. Deciding who's worth biting based on skin tone." Ward flinched at the bluntness, but he didn't deny it. "Patterns of predation. They suggest a bias. Selective aggression aligned with inherited traits." The words lingered like poison. Marcus felt the lieutenant's eyes boring into him, suspicion twisting in their gaze. The camp was already a fragile tinderbox of fear. News like this could light it ablaze. Reyes broke the silence. "Here's the truth, soldier. If I let this knowledge spread, half my men will see you as proof of salvation. The other half will see you as the reason their families are dead. Either way, it tears this camp apart." Marcus leaned forward, his expression cold and unwavering. "Then keep it quiet. You need fighters, not scapegoats." Reyes studied him for a long moment, then gave a short nod. "You'll stay here under watch. You'll fight when I tell you to fight. You'll eat when I tell you to eat. And you'll keep your mouths shut about the infected ignoring you. Understand?" Marcus inclined his head slightly. Jamal muttered under his breath, but one sharp glance silenced him. When they were escorted back to their tent, Jamal finally spoke, voice low. "Man, you hear yourself. We're prisoners. He's scared of us." Marcus stared at the campfires flickering through the canvas. "Fear is power. Sometimes it's better to let men think they're holding the leash." But his words didn't sit well with either of them. That night, the screams began. Not from within the walls but just outside them. The infected had gathered in greater numbers, drawn by the scent of the living. Their guttural moans drifted over the barricades, filling the camp with dread. Guards shouted orders, rifles cracked in the night, and the stench of gunpowder mingled with the rot of the dead. Marcus and Jamal pushed out of their tent, only to find men scrambling along the walls, firing wildly into the darkness. The horde was larger than anything the outpost had faced before, a tide of rotting bodies pressing against rusted vehicles and wooden palisades. Reyes barked commands, his voice a whip cutting through chaos. "Hold the line. Don't let them breach." The dead clawed at the barricades, relentless, and Marcus felt the strange weight of eyes upon him. Not human, not alive, but aware. A cluster of the infected paused mid-charge, their snarls turning silent when their gazes fixed on him. They stood there, unmoving as though waiting for something. Reyes noticed. His face darkened, realization dawning. Marcus knew then that secrecy was finished. Whatever fragile balance had existed in the camp was gone the moment those creatures chose to stop and stare. The barricade shuddered under the weight of the horde, wood splintering, metal bending. Men screamed as they were dragged over the top, torn apart in moments. Gunfire thundered, but it was not enough. The wall would not hold. And through it all Marcus and Jamal stood untouched, the tide of death parting around them like water flowing around stone. Reyes' eyes met Marcus across the chaos, And what Marcus saw there was not gratitude. It was fear. The wall cracked, timbers breaking, and the horde surged inward. Marcus Hale tightened the straps of his backpack as he and Jamal Carter moved quietly through the ruined streets of what had once been a thriving city. Broken windows yawned open like wounds, cars sat abandoned with doors ajar, and the air was thick with the copper tang of old blood. Every sound mattered in this new world. A bottle tipping over or a shoe scraping concrete could bring death rushing in teeth first. Marcus had been a soldier once, trained to expect the worst, but nothing in his career had prepared him for the undead. Jamal walked slightly behind him, muttering under his breath as though humor could hold back fear. You'd think with all these malls and grocery stores, one of them zombies would be distracted by a food court. His voice was low, but Marcus caught it. He didn't laugh. He rarely did anymore. The pair moved like shadows, weapons ready but unneeded so far. That was the strangest thing, the thing Marcus had yet to put into words. Every time the undead had appeared, they came snarling, snapping, lunging at others. At men, women, children. But not at them. He'd watched a group of 10 zombies tear through a survivor they'd been trailing, then turn their lifeless eyes toward him and Jamal. And then nothing. No rush, no gnashing teeth. Just stillness, as though they hadn't seen them at all. Marcus had theories. He kept them to himself. Jamal, however, had no such restraint. Man, you notice they don't even look at us. It's like we don't exist. Like we're ghosts or something. Marcus paused at the intersection of 2 crumbling streets and scanned for movement. Keep your voice down. I'm serious though. That pack the other night. They looked right past me like I was invisible. Like maybe we're not on the menu. Jamal's eyes were wide. Not with fear but with the uncomfortable edge of realization. Marcus didn't respond. Not until he spotted the faint plume of smoke curling up beyond a collapsed overpass. Camp, he said, pointing. Might be survivors. They moved quickly, weaving through rusted-out cars and rubble until they reached the source of the smoke. A single man sat by a fire, gaunt and pale, clutching a pistol he barely seemed able to hold steady. His lab coat was smeared with dried blood, and his glasses were cracked across one lens. When Marcus stepped into view, the man almost fired before realizing they weren't zombies. I thought I was alone, the man whispered, lowering the gun with trembling hands. Not yet, Marcus said, keeping his distance. Name? Dr. Elias Ward. I was. He stopped, coughed, then pressed a bloodied handkerchief to his mouth. I was with the research division before the collapse. Government? Marcus asked sharply. Ward nodded. Centers for Disease Control. We were trying to study the infection, but once it spread beyond containment, everything unraveled. His eyes flicked to Jamal. Wait, how long have you 2 been out here? Long enough, Jamal said. He offered a half-smile that didn't quite mask his unease. Guess what? Not a single scratch. Ward blinked, adjusting his glasses. His gaze lingered, almost clinical, before his expression hardened into something Marcus couldn't read. You've encountered the infected, haven't you? Plenty, Marcus said flatly. And they didn't attack you. The silence stretched. Marcus didn't want to confirm it, but Jamal, ever blunt, jumped in. Yeah, they don't. They rip apart everyone else, but when they see us, nothing. It's like they don't even register we're alive. Ward stared, his lips parting as though he'd stumbled onto a truth he'd been dreading. Dear God, he muttered, voice almost inaudible. Marcus narrowed his eyes. What do you know? Ward shook his head, clutching his pistol tighter. Not here. Not now. But this is bigger than you realize. If it's happening to you, then the virus isn't acting at random. It's choosing. Jamal let out a short, humorless laugh. Choosing. Like it's racist or something. Ward's expression didn't change. His silence said enough. The weight of the moment pressed down on Marcus. He felt the street around them grow colder, more dangerous. If the doctor was right, then this wasn't just about survival. It was about understanding why they had been spared. And in a world where trust was scarce and information even scarcer, knowledge was often more dangerous than the undead themselves. "Where's the nearest safe zone?" Marcus asked. Ward hesitated. "There's an outpost north of here, led by a man named Captain Reyes. Military disciplined. They've managed to hold the infected at bay so far. But..." He glanced again at Marcus and Jamal, uncertainty etched into every line of his face. "You need to be careful. If what I think is true, people won't see you as lucky. They'll see you as a threat." Jamal frowned. "We save a guy from starving, and the thanks we get is people thinking we're the enemy? That's how fear works," Marcus said, his voice grim. They helped Ward to his feet, steadying him as they began the trek north. The road was littered with reminders of what the world had become: abandoned homes, overturned buses, the occasional shriveled corpse rotting in the sun. And every so often the dead stirred. Gray-skinned bodies shuffled out from shadows or crawled across cracked asphalt, drawn by the scent of Ward, by the sound of his cough, by the rhythm of his beating heart. But when their milky eyes turned toward Marcus and Jamal, something uncanny happened. They stopped, hesitated, then moved past as though the men weren't even there. One ghoul brushed so close to Jamal that its foul breath washed over him, but its jaws never opened. Ward's hand trembled as he scribbled notes into a battered journal. "Incredible," he muttered. "Selective predation. If this can be harnessed..." He trailed off, but his eyes gleamed with dangerous fascination. Marcus ignored the words, but his gut twisted. He knew what it meant when scientists saw survivors as experiments. He'd seen it overseas, in places where war blurred the line between soldier and subject. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching long across the ruined highway as they neared the outskirts of the outpost. Marcus could see the faint glimmer of barricades, the silhouettes of armed men on watch. Safety, perhaps, or another kind of danger. Jamal broke the silence with a forced chuckle. "So zombies hate everybody, except us. Ain't that something? Guess we're special." Marcus kept his eyes on the horizon, jaw set like stone. Special doesn't always mean safe. As the gates of the outpost came into view, torches burning against the dying light, Marcus felt the weight of what lay ahead. The dead might have ignored them, but the living would not. And in this broken world, it was often the living who posed the greater threat.